Hello, welcome everyone to the first video of 2024, and thank you for sticking with me if you did do all the way through 2023. It was a very nice year on YouTube, and I'm going to talk about a couple of things in this vid pertaining to the YouTube side of things, content-wise, also the Twitch side of things, which of course is my main thing mostly, and I'm going to run down all the way through to Colosseum Rewards, which is a bit of a hot topic right now, I think. And a fairly important one considering that it's coming up over the next few months. So to start off with, my plans for, my plans for every year, I try to put them down, but I usually fail. Or they get adapted or changed very quickly, that's just how it is for me. But I stuck to a fair few things this year, and I think most successfully got FCF up and running. If you're not aware of what that is, it's basically my Inferno walkthrough series, 10 episodes of first cape examples and running through my thought process as I do Inferno. That was basically received extremely well, helped a ton of people, and even now on stream every single day, probably 5 to 10 people at least per stream coming in and expressing some level of thanks for putting it up and all that, which is very cool to see, and big mission successful on that one. So that type of content is definitely something I want to explore more of. Not just for hard things, but fairly simple things as well, including pretty much any low-level content, not like Mole or Barrows or something, but early TOA, early solo chambers. I've got the top stuff up and running as well, although it's not quite the same nature. But also some of the more like various demi-bosses found around the game as well. I think they are fairly useful resources, and I think the method, like the way I present them, is useful. So I'm hoping to get some more of those out this year as well. I wouldn't call them guides, and I'm not sure I want to do much guide content, although, of course, when Colosseum comes out, that's probably going to be the big PVM release of this year, so I would expect to make something on those, whether it be a walkthrough or a mini guide or anything along those lines. As far as YouTube goes, this isn't really my main thing. It's kind of like I'll take stream highlights here and there and I'll do some stuff. And if something takes my fancy, I'll make a video. I think I'd like to do more of this style of like semi-rambly, semi-open discussion stuff. Partially because it's kind of easy and kind of fun to talk about stuff and put thoughts down. And I get to bounce stuff off a lot of you guys who either have ideas in the comments or will give me interesting thoughts, corrections, sometimes terrible ideas, by the way, thanks for that. But depends how it goes, and regardless, I think these are like useful things to put up. But one of the things I wanted to do this year was YouTube streaming, because my primary thing has been Twitch for the last 5 or so years, and Twitch is doing really nicely, but with YouTube growing and things like multi-streaming or just well, not necessarily multi-streaming at the same time, but streaming to both platforms, it's becoming something I'm thinking about doing. And one thing I won't do is multi-stream, purely because I don't think it's good for the chat interaction. I think it's not as good an experience to be able to, like, if you can't see the chat for the question that's being asked or the content that's being talked about, it kind of takes away a little bit, so I'd rather not quite go that far. But I was considering maybe dedicating 1 or 2 days a week to a smaller portion of a YouTube stream here and there. So if that's something that takes your fancy, do let me know. As far as what content it's going to be, I want to keep it relatively casual. Some of my more semi-slow grinds, there will still be some interesting PVM things here and there. The odd Inferno or two maybe, bit of Colosseum when it comes out, that kind of thing. But it's probably not going to be as, shall I say, high tier as the Twitch gameplay tends to be. Not that I've done too much high tier stuff this year so far, but we may get onto that in the future. But that's an idea at least, and curious on what people's thoughts are and if you'd like to see that, and again, what type of content you'd like to see, if that's the case. I am subtly, acutely aware, I guess, that the sort of community on Twitch and YouTube is quite different, and in my experience and what I've seen, Twitch is fairly high level in comparison to YouTube. Not flame, that's just how it is. And the YouTube side of things is a lot more casual when it comes to playing the game, and again, that's going to sort of tailor what I plan on doing and how I plan on going about doing it, and I guess the kind of content that I want to create here. So give me your thoughts on that, particularly if you're interested in watching, what you'd fancy watching, and if you think that's fair. But yes, YouTube done very well. Thank you very, very much. FCF done very well. More stuff like that, and YouTube streaming potentially on the horizon. As far as the other side of this is kind of the bigger point I wanted to get through today. And there is one more thing, which is going to be like my actual account goals, which I don't think I've discussed yet. But as you can see here, we're doing a bit of aerial, and there is going to be more stuff like this in the future of this account. But the second part of this is going to be about Colosseum Rewards. Now that we've had a bit of time for the dust to settle since the announcement, and we've had a little bit of a think about what it is exactly that Colosseum should sort of really be like, we haven't really had any new info or like big teasers and hints and things, but from sort of small discussions with JMods, between lots of general community discussion and that kind of stuff, I think we have a better understanding of what it's going to feel like. But the one thing that doesn't really stand out as really good to me right now is the rewards. And you may have heard some of this discussion yourselves, or you may have thought about it, and really what it comes down to is that there may not be a massive GP incentive to do the Colosseum as it stands. And while not all content needs that, when you're talking about doing something repetitively for a long period of time, it's one of the major incentivizations is GP per hour. So the Colosseum has one major reward right now, which is the Quiver, and that's an untradeable item. The best in slot, it's a pretty big upgrade. It's actually a massive upgrade, really, for like everything. But it is certainly untradeable. And that sort of leaves all the other stuff up for discussion as to the rates and whatnot. But the actual proposed items don't seem that good. For example, the Sunfire Fanatic armor. This is not endgame armor, and it's not going to have an endgame price attached to it. It's going to be sort of mid to late game Slayer armor that's sort of like semi-useful, but it's not replacing Masuri, it's not replacing Crystal, it's not doing anything like that. It's like souped up range Proselyte armor. That's the idea. So there's no real price tag. I don't think there will be a real price tag associated with that. Not one that boosts the GP an hour tremendously. Second part of that would be the glaive. And this is probably the big one that doesn't really quite compute right now, because the glaive is a weapon that reduces defense based on the magic level of an NPC. And while it has a decent reduction attached to it, there's a very limited pool of NPCs this item can be used on. And one of the most quoted places where people think it's useful is Olm. But it just so happens you can't reduce Olm's head defense. And even if you could, it wouldn't be a major time save in any raid. It probably wouldn't be worth bringing over another item. So even if they did, even if they were to change that idea about Olm's head and how it worked, we may end up in a place where it doesn't really have a good use case. There's no place in TOA where it would be very useful, really. There's no place in TOB where it would be really useful. And again, even if it was, the question is it worth the space or more effective than a Warhammer, which you would be bringing anyway? And currently, I think the answer is sort of a decent no, not a resounding yes, but it doesn't seem to have anywhere that's crazy good. Another place could be Inferno, Zerk, Giants, and it is very effective on these places, but you then have to ask the question, who's using it there? And the answer is not first capers, and the answer is probably not even the most people doing it on task. Maybe speedrunners will touch it. That's a bit of a stretch as well. And so, again, we're in this place where it is kind of hard to figure out where it's useful. The obvious one is that it will be useful in Colosseum. And of course, that if it's, dropped by the place it's useful, that makes sense. A lot of items are in the game. But will that really carry a hefty enough price tag to warrant going out and buying it? Because a weapon that reduces defense is not like super game-changing, really. We have a lot of accuracy in game already, and adding a weapon that just helps you a little bit more isn't usually the thing that makes or breaks a fight. A bit like at Olm, if you miss your hammers at Olm, you still get through the run just fine. And as far as the other rewards go, you're not using this item, a bit like how Scythe at Tob is used to farm a Vernix, and it gets a decent amount of value from its use at Tob. Glaive probably won't have a massive sort of increase in GP an hour for the content, because the other rewards may not be worth too much either. So it's a bit concerning, and while it's not the end of the world if it does release as it is, I do think there's a bit of room for either 1 or 2 new items from Colosseum that are somewhat valuable for whatever reasons. Maybe they're best in slots, or maybe they're just like really useful for some reason, or an actual direct buff to the idea of what this ranged defense reduction weapon looks like, the glaive. So, a bit sketchy on that one, but I think there's definitely some room there. And then we have stuff like the Sunfire Dust, which is, I think, fine as it stands. And lastly, the Echo Crystal, which was just a proposed reward. Certainly nothing that's set in stone, and again, this is all speculative. This could just be changed pretty quickly and without issue. But really, this Echo Crystal is a very strange item when you start thinking about what it is and how the Colosseum works. Because the big deal with it, the Colosseum, is that it is based on glory. And glory is a measurement of your performance and your time combined. That is to say, there must be some method for them to track your mistakes and deduct points from you based on your mistakes, deduct glory. And we can only make an assumption that taking a hit is likely to be a mistake, as far as it counts. Perfect runs are probably going to be runs where you take very little damage. And so to have an item like Echo Crystal on a pair of boots that is like a pair of melee tank boots implies there's going to be a pretty hefty chunk of damage coming your way. Or that you're going to be making mistakes, and this is an item that covers for it. That doesn't seem to play too well into the glory system, I don't think. But, again, this may just be something that we need a bit more info on to really understand better. But I'm not so sure that it fits the glory system as it is. So the rewards seem a little bit confused. And I'm not sure they have their own place. And I'm not sure unless they actively generate spots for these things to be useful in. And again, they can do this, but it may take some time, or it may take some revision to content or future things. I just don't see it being a huge GP an hour activity. Now, in terms of like what good GP an hour is right now, I would say starting out PVMing, you're going to make anywhere from 1 to 1.5 mil per hour. Things like Zorva and Vorkath have dropped dramatically, and are now barely pushing 2 mil an hour for the average Joe, whereas things like Muspur have sort of taken over that title of the 3 to 4 mil an hour bosses. CG remains maybe 5-ish mil, if I recall. And things like raiding push 10 mil, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it. There are some exceptions with things like high-level solo TOA, where you're making close to 15 mil an hour, and even into the 20s. I believe Nex right now, with the increased price of Torva, is something like 20 to 25, which is kind of absurd, but no one likes Nex, so that's kind of okay. And with that kind of GP an hour floating around, I don't think it's too much to ask for a brand new released piece of content, which also has like this whole region. I mean, it's not, it's not attached to it's not the region attached to it, it's attached to the region, but it is like the primary sort of major compelling thing. But I'm lagging out here a bit. It's like the major thing that people are going to flock to within the city as well. This is nice. Oh, there we go. And I think it just makes a whole lot of sense that this activity at the very least hits 5 mil an hour. That's talking better than Muspur Vorkath, probably on par with something like Gauntlet, which again you would expect to be sort of around the area. Same for something like Asani or Nightmare. And if not pushing 15 mil at the high end, that's kind of the window. And again, with this whole idea of the rewards don't seem to really add that much value, I don't really see the activity pushing 5 mil in the mid to long term. And of course, content on release is a bit different, and it's always going to do quite well. But I think a lot of us have high hopes for this piece of content. It's kind of like meant to be a bit of a successor to Fight Cave's Inferno. If you didn't know, it was kind of meant to be this. It was previously Blue Inferno, which was the Game Jam project from Modhusky. And that was very, very well received all around. So we have on our hands here a big area, a big project, a big effective reskin of it, and not really much in the way of what seems to be incentive. Now, I'm going in circles here, so I'll round it up here, but that's more or less the idea. And ultimately, it is hard to find new and fitting items. There is a bit of a problem right now with the game in terms of reward space, and they've addressed some of this in the Rebalance blog. They've talked about the idea of opening things up, and I suppose there is just a genuine difficulty in creating reward space, filling reward space with stuff that doesn't just break the game or unnecessarily power creep stuff. So it's a tricky problem no matter how you look at it, but I'm just not fully convinced right now that we're going to be getting the Colosseum that we kind of deserve and look forward to and really kind of just want, I guess. So yeah, on a more interesting note outside of that stuff, and again, if you're interested in this stuff or you have any thoughts on what they could do and how they could sort of fix it, I guess, do leave a comment down below. Always interesting, and some of these ideas are just not thought about much. And so whenever I hear something in particular that makes a lot of sense, or I think just is like the way forwards, I'm going to start echoing that to try and get the news out and try and make it more obvious and let people know. And it does make a difference. Not everything is going to get through to the JMod team, but when like a really good idea surfaces or a really interesting thought comes up, they do hear about it. And it can often sneak its way into content in some form or another. But moving on to my account and my plans for this year on this account. So here's the deal. I am about to finish all 3 raids. Last year I got done with Chambers of Xeric, as you can see. Nice little log. This Chambers log is nowhere near correct because I was doing Cox well before the log came out. My top log is essentially 50 KC away from being done for my last slot, which is really cool. And I'm going to be doing this after TOA. And then TOA over here is about 450 KC away from being done itself. So my plan currently for the account is to have all 3 raids green logged and complete and fully done by end of January, leading into February. And my hope is that simply the Colosseum is likely to be released from either early February all the way through to early March. That's kind of the window of expectation that I currently have. And so if I'm done with this stuff, I can focus on Colosseum exclusively and farm it to my heart's content, knowing that I don't really ever have to come back to raids, and I'll feel like it's complete. I will, of course, do some here and there, but not really in the same capacity as farming them and grinding them out. Now, I'm not really a collection logger, as you can see. I'm barely at 500 slots. And what I really do and play this game for on my main account is about character and account progress. And I care very much about untradeable items and collecting untradeable items. I'm like a collector, but not a clogger. It's a bit of a weird one. I don't care so much about the log slot, I care about the physical item. And so if I can buy an item like a Zami Hester, I don't care to go out of my way to get the log slot. I just care that I have it on the account and that I own it. And that's why things like the raid capes are desirable, because they are things that are essentially collectibles, and especially when it's PVM, I'm super interested, which is why I determined that I would go for the raid capes first, and then do stuff like aerial fishing second. And there are plenty of things, of course, including aerial fishing, where the golden tench, the rods, and the sack, these are all untradeable items that stay on the account, and thus sort of fit that bill of things that I want to do and want to work towards. That's my whole thing. That's all I really care about. All pets is on the list of things to do, but it is a very, very long-term passive thing, because these are ultimately account collectibles, but I am also not willing to go out of my way to do pet hunts that are unenjoyable. That's where I kind of draw the line. Pretty simple. But I will go for some over time and choose them as a passive grind as opposed to an active thing I work on. And other things like, I don't know if these turn out to be uniques, I will unfortunately go for things like this. I guess even the chompy hats down the road, I'll just do like 150 KC a day or something. That's kind of the idea. I'm going to run through everything, and even stuff like monkey backpacks, if these guys are all untradables, they will eventually be in my bank. That's the plan. So I've got a lot of pain on the horizon, basically. Some stuff is going to be fun, some stuff is not. Stuff like aerial fishing is kind of nice. I can do this for an hour a day and get some good rewards, some good gains. And stuff like Tithe Farm, I don't really like it, but again, all that stuff is untradeable, collectibles, and so I kind of want it. And that's my 2024 on this account. That's really the plan, is to choose a couple of these things at a time and work towards them for a couple of hours a day. Not overdoing it, not caring too much about the actual progress, simply that I'm making steady progress towards them. And I expect by the end of 2024, I will have, I suppose, a majority of the items in the game that constitute what I care about. Now, there will, of course, be new releases and whatnot. With Colosseum coming up, that's really going to be the major focus. And if something like that comes up, particularly a big PVM thing, I'm going to detour massively to farm that content as much as I can. Both for the sake of YouTube streaming, Twitch streaming, content on here, and yeah, just like having fun with it if I really like it. And that is really the entire plan. So I think that's all I've got for you today. But if you enjoyed any of this, or care to leave a comment about some of the ideas for what you would like to see if you would watch the streams on YouTube, as well as thoughts on the Colosseum Rewards and their current status. I'm not convinced. I want to see a little bit more. I'm hoping, and by the way, on January the 20th, 12 days from today, there's going to be the Winter Summit, in which they talk about content for the new year. And I didn't actually think they were going to do this, but they did in fact confirm it. And presumably we are going to get a lot more info on that Jan 20th date. And moving up from there, I don't know, maybe we get like 1 or 2 more quests. I don't think they're going to announce anything big other than the Colosseum release date. But ultimately, the Winter Summit should be not too dissimilar to the Summer Summit. And therefore, you'd expect to see 1 or 2 major releases. Again, I think the focus is going to be Varlamore with a side of Colosseum, but that will remain to be seen. So if you made it this far, thanks very much for watching. Hopefully this is going to be another fantastic year, and we're going to try some different stuff. So if you care to come along with me and enjoy it, I shall see you there. But that's all I got for you today, so I'm going to get back to my aerial fishing, and thanks for watching.